In my first therapy session, my therapist asked me why I was there, and I told her I wanted to get married and have children and not take generational curses with me. The specific issues were mother-daughter issues. I refused to replicate the relationship my mom had with my grandmother. Generational trauma is like an old, heavy suitcase that gets passed down from mother to daughter. Some of us carry it without question, some of us unpack it and sort through the mess, and some of us decide, I'm not taking this baggage with me. And that's the work that I had to do. Hello, beautiful people, and welcome back to another episode of Pretty Intentional, the podcast where beauty, lifestyle, and personal growth intersect. I'm your host, Candice Coleman, and here we have real conversations about everything from self-care and confidence to faith, friendships, and leveling up in life. We've officially made it to episode 6, and to say I'm proud of myself is an understatement. I did have to take a break last week for a work trip, so I'm glad to be back. But I will admit that in trying to prep for this week's episode, I did try to record it last week, but I ended up getting a little bit emotional and I needed a moment. I didn't want to rush and I needed it to be right, and I had to be careful in how I approached the subject. So thankfully, I gave myself grace on not sticking to my every single week posting an episode for season 1. And I'm also not sure how many episodes are going to be in season 1 before I take a much needed break, but I'm sure life will let me know. If you're still here and still listening every week, thank you. Whether you're a friend or a family member of mine, an old makeup client, or just a follower from social media, however you found me and however long you've been around, thank you for staying around for the evolution of me and the brand and what Pretty Intentional has become. If you're new here, welcome. Be sure to subscribe and follow the podcast wherever you listen to your podcast, and share with someone because sharing is caring. It's March and spring is officially here. The true new year, if you know, you know. We chatted about that in episode 3, but March is also Women's History Month. And this year, I'm left thinking a lot about legacy building and communities we create, specifically as Black women. I am beyond grateful for the community that I have here in life and online. So I'm loving this extension of my already existing online community through the podcast community now. As I said before, I wanted to get deeper with my audience, and I think that's exactly what we're doing here on Pretty Intentional. In episode 5, we talked about building self-love and self-confidence through positive affirmations and mirror work, because I wholeheartedly believe we speak to and treat others the way we speak to and treat ourselves. What I didn't dive deeper into, and something that I want to talk about this week, is how our mothers and our relationships with our mothers play a pivotal role in the cultivation of our self-confidence and the matrilineal generational curses that many of us Black women carry. Our relationships with our mothers shape so much of who we are, our confidence, our fears, even our ability to love ourselves. But what happens when that relationship is complicated, distant, or even painful? Today, we're talking about healing, acceptance, and seeing our mothers as women first. I've previously shared in past episodes that my mother and I didn't always have the best relationship. I know I'm not alone in this, and it's a feeling and a struggle that many Black women have with their mothers for a number of reasons, be it abuse or abandonment, and or whether that abuse and or abandonment is physical or emotional. It's not always easy for us to talk about it. Sometimes our feelings are negated and our mother wounds are placated by the blanket statement, well, she's the only mother you have. Newsflash, moms be fucked up too. And moms need to be held accountable as well. My mother and I are in a wonderful place right now, and I love that for both of us. But this took a long time. One of my goals when I turned 30 was to have a better relationship with my mom. And now at the age of 40, we're honestly just getting there. It wasn't easy for either of us. We've gone through long periods of no contact. We've had painful conversations. There's been yelling. There's been tears. Hell, when I was diagnosed with breast cancer, I did not want her to come to Houston to even take care of me. But I am glad that she did. And I don't think we would be where we are today if she didn't. After listening to the last episode, episode 5, my mother FaceTimed me and she was in tears. Of course, me answering the phone and seeing my mom crying, I'm startled and I want to know what's wrong. But what she told me was, she said, I'm proud of you. And she just continued to cry and I was confused. And she said that she just listened to the episode and she was proud of me because she always wondered where I got my self-confidence and my self-love, because she knew it wasn't something that she gave me and that I, through the podcast, was giving her something that she never had. And that just threw me for a loop. There's something about when your mom takes accountability and accepts something. But my mother has said many times that she wants to be me when she grows up and she learns a lot from me, which I used to think was just something that she said. But for someone who has never needed the approval of my parents and been self-sufficient and self-sustaining in so many ways, it was nice to hear that how I'm going about life is healing to my mother. So if no one gets anything from this podcast, the fact that my mother could communicate that to me, it's a win and I have fulfilled my purpose. So how did we get here? What was the turning point? Well, honestly, it wasn't just one thing. It was a journey, and that journey started with therapy. Therapy taught me how to process my emotions and, more importantly, stop expecting my mother to be someone she wasn't. In my first therapy session, my therapist asked me why I was there, and I told her I wanted to get married and have children and not take generational curses with me. The specific issues were mother-daughter issues. I refused to replicate the relationship my mom had with my grandmother. Generational trauma is like an old, heavy suitcase that gets passed down from mother to daughter. Some of us carry it without question. Some of us unpack it and sort through the mess. And some of us decide, I'm not taking this baggage with me. And that's the work that I had to do. I went into therapy thinking that majority of my issues, for lack of a better word, came from my mother. And I knew they came from her mother, but I didn't know how to stop it. My first exercise in therapy that I had to do, which I think many people may do this in their first session, and it's where you go from 0 to 10. And in this exercise, 0 to 10, you're doing from the time you were born until you're 10 years old. You write down all the memories that you can think of, both good and bad, but then you categorize them. These are the good ones I have, and these are the bad ones. So I did just that. And remember, ladies, we're doing our homework assignments in therapy. So when I got back to my next session, my therapist had me read all of the things that I had written, good and bad, from 0 to 10. I saw my therapist scribbling in her notepad. I thought she's just making notes of all the things that made me the way I was. To my surprise, she said, well, this is interesting. In our first session, you didn't have anything good to say about your mom. But in this exercise, everything good that you mentioned from birth to age 10 was all about your mother. What happened? Bitch, when I say I was gagged, shocked, appalled, in tears almost. If you get that reference, you're my people. Shout out to Nene Leaks. But hearing my therapist say that every good memory I had before 10 was about my mom, that was a gut punch. I had spent so much time focusing on what I lacked that I didn't even realize what she had given me. Therapy really helped me realize that the things weren't as bad as they could have been or as I thought they were. And now, don't get me wrong, my mom has done some things that to this day I will never understand. But there were still so many things that she gave me, some that I was able to identify and many that I didn't realize. I think I was focusing on what I felt I was lacking, but it really was, I was wanting my mom to give me things that she didn't have the capability to do. She didn't have the tools. She didn't have the guidance. Have you ever asked your mother what she learned from her mother? And if you still have your grandmother, have you asked her as well? Some years ago, I was trying to get my mother to understand that while she was just begging for some grace from me, she wasn't willing to give the same grace to her own mother. She kept trying to assure me that things were different. My grandmother was a different type of mother than she was. And I kept telling her, no, it's not different. It's the same. I started interviewing my grandmother and asking her questions. It became really important to me to have conversations with her as she was getting older. And I wanted to learn more about her life and my lineage. Sometimes I would ask her these questions with my mother present, hoping and praying that my mother would have this aha moment, that through listening to my grandmother speak, she would learn something about her own mother that she didn't know, and it would maybe change her perspective. One thing I specifically asked my grandmother was, "What did your mother teach you about being a woman?" To which she replied, very curtly and a furrowed face, "Teach me about being a woman? She didn't. What could she teach me? She didn't know anything." And I saw this look on my mother's face, and I felt like she was starting to get it. You see, my great-grandmother got married at 14 years old. She started having children at 15 years old and went on to have 14 children. When she was 14, she literally was dressed up, and her parents put her in a dress, cleaned her up, sat her on the porch, and this man just came and literally grabbed her by the hand and whisked her away. And that was it. She was a wife, she was quickly a mother, and no longer to be mothered by her own mother. That lack of guidance from my great-grandmother directly impacted my grandmother. I spent years asking my grandmother questions, trying to understand what made her the way that she was. And I unearthed so many stories that made up the fabric of who she was. Why she was angry, why she was mean, why she was sometimes sad, why she was just longing for love in oftentimes the wrong places. One of the things I learned about my grandmother was that she wanted to go to beauty school and her parents told her no. I had the privilege of finding her original beauty school application that her parents then just stuffed away in a drawer and never opened it again. That decision of no changed my grandmother's life tremendously. Who would my grandmother have become if she went to beauty school, if she had her own salon? And I think about the fact that I, in many ways, work in the beauty industry. So when they say you are your grandparents' wildest dreams, I know that I am Frankie's wildest dream, doing the things that I do, that she was never able to do. Definitely a flawed woman, and that wasn't going to change. But it made me wish that my mom was able to do something that I feel like I was able to do early on, which was accept my mother for who she is, flaws and all, without trying to change her. Accepting my mother for who she was and knowing that there was a good chance she wasn't going to change was really important. It goes back to that concept of control what you can control and surrender the rest. I could control how I responded to my mother. I could control my proximity. I couldn't control her response, because even if I knew and understood her trauma and what made her the way she was, I was only responsible for my own healing and growth. It gets to a point you just have to let them be who they are. Now, my mother finally got there with her own mother, and it was so humbling and life-changing to watch my mother lose her mother while I was simultaneously fighting for my life with cancer. In the last months before my grandmother passed away, my mother was scheduled to take her on her last vacation to the beach. That was one of the things they did, and my grandmother looked forward to it. As a result of her declining health, she wasn't able to go. And to my surprise, my mother decided she was still going to go to the beach alone. And I'm glad she did. She needed it. I knew my mom was having conflicting feelings around losing her mother, knowing the relationship that they had. And I said to her, "Are you okay with knowing that you may never get the acknowledgement, that you'll never get the acceptance, that you may never get the apology? Are you okay with that?" And I asked her that because, let's face it, one thing that is certain is death, our own and others. But waiting for someone else to realize something and take accountability, that may never happen and you may never get it. So going to therapy and accepting my mother for who she is have been very important. But the biggest thing, seeing her as a woman first and not just my mom. That changed everything for me. Because have you ever stopped to think about who your mom was before she became your mom? I have been having a lot of conversations with one of my closest friends, and we keep talking about our mothers and who they were to us, but really looking at who they were before they were our mothers. And I keep having these aha moments that when I sit back and I think about my mother's life, and I just say, Girl, how the fuck did you navigate that without guidance? How the hell did you raise me when you weren't raised a certain way? To put things into perspective, my mother got married to my father at 19 years old, mere 3 weeks before she turned 20. 3 months later, she was pregnant with me. She went into labor on her 21st birthday. Before I was 2 years old, she's pregnant again. 23, she's on kid number 2. Now, we know that postpartum can last 18 to 24 months on the low end. And she biked the bike having kids. Back in another postpartum cycle. The first 5 years of her marriage, she was a hormonal and emotional wreck, figuring out womanhood, motherhood, and being a wife with no guidance. And still, somehow, she managed to give me some amazing memories. Everything wasn't great, but I often sit and think that I don't know what I would have done if I were in the same situation. Our mothers are women first, with their own fears, dreams, and stories. Seeing them that way can change everything. This week, if you can, ask your mom one simple question. What was your biggest dream before you had kids? And you might be surprised with what you learn. Now, if you are in no contact with your mother, and for good reason, by no means am I saying break that, but if you are hoping to make your relationship with your mother better, or just want and need to feel better about your feelings around your mother, I hope this episode helped you. And for those who have lost their mother or a mother figure, or you fear you will be losing your mother, or just want to prepare yourself, one of my good girlfriends and near and dear friends, Ty Alexander. Ty also has a podcast, Self-Care in Real Life. She wrote a book called Things I Wish I Knew Before My Mother Died. And I think that is an amazing resource for you as well. I'll be sure to link that in the show notes. Thanks for joining me for another episode of Pretty Intentional. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a comment. You can follow me at Candice Beauty on all platforms, and be sure to follow Pretty Intentional as well. Remember, being intentional isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up for yourself and your journey. Until next time, stay true to yourself, live with purpose, and as always, keep it pretty intentional.